Welcome to Safety Spectrum, your environmental health and safety connection. This program is a presentation of the Michigan Safety Conference. For almost a century, the annual conference has provided credible educational opportunities and valuable support to the safety and health practitioner by offering 120 instructional programs along with exhibits highlighting the latest in safety equipment, instrumentation, and demonstrations. To learn more about the conference, please find us at safetyconference.org. Welcome to Safety Spectrum, the podcast for the Michigan Safety Conference. I'm your host, Sheila Ide. Our program today is considering all the effects of safety events. Workplace injuries and incidents can have far-reaching consequences that extend beyond the immediate physical harm suffered by an employee. This is a quote from an article published by Mr. Galloway entitled Beyond the Physical Toll, the Collateral Damage of Safety Incidents. Today we'll be exploring just what that means to an organization. Shawn Galloway is the CEO of ProAct Safety and an advisor to leading organizations across all major industries. He's the most prolific author in his field, having written over 500 articles and several best-selling books on safety leadership and culture, among other things. He also told me he launched the first safety podcast, Safety Culture Excellence. So I'm walking in some big shoes here. As a recognized authority in safety excellence, he has appeared on Bloomberg, Fox News, The Daily Mail, Business Insider, U.S. News and World Report, Sirius Business Radio, and Wharton Business Daily. Shawn also serves on the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council, the Forbes Business Council, and the Fast Company Executive Board, enabling him to shape safety thinking and strategy at the executive level. So thank you for joining me today, Shawn.
Sheila, happy to be here. I don't know if it's big shoes or old shoes, because when I started that podcast back in January 2008, podcasting was a relatively new thing. And I'm not sure what I was thinking at the time when I committed to producing weekly episodes, but we've done so
Wow.
since then. And luckily, there's a lot of tools that can help us automate that. But I'm really happy to be here, and it's a pleasure having this conversation today.
I appreciate that. Uh, First of all, I like to always ask, tell me a little bit about your company, ProAct Safety, and what your personal philosophy is.
Thank you for that. So my firm was established back in 1993 by Terry Mathis. I joined him in 2005, became president in 2009, and then Terry retired and I became a single shareholder of the firm in 2021. So we've always been focusing in five areas. We tend to get involved more for companies that are on the path towards excellence in safety, and sometimes they've had a terrible event that shook them to their core. And how did this happen? Others, they want to make sure they're not either in an echo chamber or breathing their own exhaust. So they bring people like me in that are kind of human benchmarks. And what else aren't we thinking about? Most of the firms are doing really well, but they either reach a plateau or they're reaching for a better, and they're just not satisfied with where they're at. But we tend to focus on what we call the five core capacities, and that's ensuring you have the system capacity. So that's both in prevention, but also recover when mistakes are made. Then you have to have leadership capacity. Are we aligning people to our performance expectations and out there seeking out those deviations before they produce an event? Do we have the engagement capacity? Are we doing things where people want to be involved in safety and they see value in the things that we're doing? Cultural capacity. Everybody has a culture. Everybody has something that we've called safety culture since 1986, but are we intentional about it? And then finally, do we have the strategic capacity? Does our strategy support the trajectory of the firm and protect it from internal and outside risks versus safety versus production? But my personal philosophy, I think I would answer it in more of what my mission is, and it's twofold. One is to continuously challenging the thinking around what is and what isn't excellence in safety. I feel like we'll probably talk about psychological safety in today's conversation. That wasn't on the radar of most organizations 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. Now there's countries like Australia to where it's mandated you have systems in place. It's government law there. There's an ISO 45003 standard. England and Canada have a standard. The UAE medical system became the first organization that was audited and certified under the ISO standard. So what we thought of was excellent in safety 5, 10 years ago is antiquated a little bit. And I would imagine if we were having this conversation in 2030, what we talk about today, coming towards the end of 2025, is going to be a little outdated. So it's that continuously challenging the thinking, but it's also connecting with people through stories to shape their thinking outside of work. And I'll probably tell a story today that will reinforce why that's important to me. But
Probably by
it's
2030, we'll be doing this via IA or AI, right?
that's
Will the
exactly right.
robots talking?
We'll upload our thoughts and it will produce it for us. So
Have
no
little
mistakes,
pictures.
it'll be great.
I'm sure you've heard of the VPP that OSHA and Michigan OSHA also, and they're always looking for excellent companies to try to go to the next level. But I think you're absolutely right. They don't really look until something really terrible happens. So it's
Yeah.
unfortunate, but that's the game. So what was the catalyst of this article that I quoted from?
It's a culmination of many different things. It started with one of the events that I talked about in the article, but I'll give you a more personal one. It started with an organization that I've been working with for almost 20 years, and they've done great things. And I'm not an advisor contiguously all this time to kind of bring me in over the years. But they've done some great stuff, and they had a particular incident that they were just sharing with me that had happened several years prior, where an individual had a spiral fracture in his leg, and it wasn't that significant, life altering, but it required, if memory serves me, about 12 surgeries over 10 years, or over, I think it was less than that, and it led to some prescription narcotics. It led to his wife trying some of those, and it led to an overdose. And it's this small little event that just happened that just continued to affect their family. And it ended with his wife losing his life, that she wasn't even a part of the original event. So there was that really shook me to the core, because both of them worked for this organization and were beloved by many people. And just this ripple effect that just continued to circle back around. But more, it's an event that happened to me in 2022. If Sheila, if you happen to be in a long-term relationship or married, and you and your spouse or partner have the benefit of having another couple that you can travel with, and all four of you get along, you're blessed. It's rare to find something like that.
Yeah.
And my wife and I had that with another couple that was a very old and dear friend of mine, Kevin, and his fiance, pretty much wife, Stephanie. And we used to travel. We hiked to the top of an active volcano in 2021. We like doing adventurous things. So he was turning 51 in November of 2022 and invited my wife and I to join them in Bali, Indonesia. And we arrived on November 14th. We explored a fantastic place. I've never experienced so many near misses like I have being driven around Bali, because the driving is, in my opinion, pretty crazy. But he wanted to hike to the top of Mount Agung on his birthday, November 17th. So it starts off on the 10 o'clock in the evening, November 16th, and celebrating his birthday at the top of a mountain. So it's 10,000-foot trek. You have to hire a guide because it's particularly dangerous, and it's at the base of one of their holiest temples. You make summit around 4:30 a.m. You meet up with all the other hikers and their guide. You watch the beautiful sunrise over the country at the tallest point there. You make your way down and you reach base camp about noon on November 17th, and the hike is over. So after summiting, watching the sunrise, coming down the mountain about 1,000 feet, Kevin tripped and he fell. And he was alive for about the first hour and a half on the side of this mountain. And there happened to be a doctor from Spain and a medic from the French military that happened to also be there. They were able to keep him alive. Even with a satellite phone with the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, there was no good way to get him off the mountain. We'll never know, but we like to believe that maybe had we could, he could have survived. But it reinforced to me two things: the recovery capacity. If things don't go to plan, what's your plan B, C, D, E, and F? And I failed to put a lot of those things in place. I had them for my wife and I, with particular international insurance that we travel with, but there's just no good way to recover from that. and I had to help carry my friend home after he was cremated in a box back to Houston, where we celebrated his life a little while later. But still to this day, it affects me. It's something that will probably be a mark you'll never see, that stays with me for the rest of my life, and it affects my wife and I every November 17th. So this is the third year since then, and just the damage that I see with his grandkids, one that he never met and one that he'll never really know, and I still see the impact on his fiance, and it shakes a lot of us because I mean, of course, it's one of those. This is like a movie. Did this really happen?
Right.
But just the effect, the invisible wounds that I call it, that you don't really see, that just continue to permeate, just continue to impact
Like you say,
people.
it's the psychological part that you don't get rid of. And I think safety and health people kind of have that, a lot of stories like that. I mean, yours is very personal, your good friend, but a lot of us feel, could we have done something differently? And we never
Yeah,
get past that. And I think that makes us good EHS professionals, that we do care that much. So talking about indirect costs to something, that's pretty close to what we need to talk about, I think. What could we have done differently? So how do
yeah.
you define collateral damage from safety incidents?
I think it's just the unintended, hard to measure impact that exists not only within an organization but within the people that are affected by this. And it's collateral because it's not the immediate impact. It's not the break to the bone. It's not the life altering event that happens. It's kind of like it's easier for us to measure the direct costs from an incident and or an illness within an organization, but without a bunch of subjectivity, it's hard to measure the indirect costs. And the indirect costs are often far greater, even financially, to an organization than the direct cost. And if you look at two probably of the most newsworthy events, in my opinion, are the Maconda incident from BP and then the 737 MAX issues that existed, in my opinion, from Boeing. And having worked with both of those organizations, I do not believe it defines who they are or their leadership or anything. It's in my opinion an example of the collateral damage that happens from these events. And both had strong systems, both had caring leaders. Nobody wanted these things to occur, but many of us know that the amount of money that was likely spent marketing BP's brand again across the Gulf of Mexico after the Maconda incident was far greater, in my opinion, than what it cost to actually clean up the Gulf of Mexico. Same thing with the stock and just the confidence in Boeing. And I know I fly almost weekly just by nature. I'm on a plane somewhere around the world 40 or so weeks out of the year. And I'm sure most of those, because of market share, I'm on a Boeing platform, as opposed to CRJs, Embraers, or Airbus. But I know a lot of people, they refuse to fly on Boeing anymore. And they'll look at the platform of the aircraft and they'll choose a different flight or they'll drive. And that's a very small example, but just the confidence in the brand. In the 1980s, there was a term, if pardon, it's not great English, but if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And I've heard people flip that now and say, if it's Boeing, I ain't going. And that's terrible because it doesn't reflect who the people are or the people that join the organization post this event, but it certainly shakes confidence. And it's led to many organizations just going out of business and they can't recover. I think both of those fall into the category of too big to fail, and we need to support them and stand them up so they can survive getting past those events. But it's the very difficult to measure, but it's like you were pointing out, it's more the psychological impact, either in confidence of the brand or just the people that are directly affected by the loss of life or the event itself.
I've had that happen in my career where we've had a fatality, and the first thing I did was I bring in psychologists. and then the managers leave the room and they just have it out. And it just, I was taught that early on, and they just need that time. I think one of the earliest ones I remember was Bhopal in India, the Dow
84,
Chemical.
yeah.
Though I
Hmm.
think a lot of things came out that were not good in relationship to how the company was handling things. So there are disasters that probably could have been avoided as well.
Yeah.
So, and that's one that comes to mind. So, what did traditional safety metrics miss? Why did traditional safety metrics miss so much of the real harm?
I don't think anybody's really measuring it. There's an old saying in safety that we tend to measure what we don't want versus what we want. So while we've gotten better at measuring all the things we don't want, harm, incidents, process events like Bhopal, occupational injuries and illnesses, it's really hard to measure the impact of these things because a lot of it is even covered by HIPAA. You can't talk about these things. It's gone through the EAP program, so we don't really talk about this. Yet if you look at some of the terrible measurements, like in America, the last 10 years, the suicide rate has increased quite drastically. And the overwork, the anxiety, the even I was looking at some information from the WHO on another article I was writing on the impact of moral injuries. And there's a term in Japan, how the names escaped me, karoshi, which means death by overwork. And Japan's actually put some legislation in effect that do not allow organizations to overwork people because it's happened so frequently they have a term for it. But it's hard to measure all of that. And some of the data, just going from memory, if you're working more than 55 hours a week, you significantly increase your chance for a cardiovascular event. And it's really hard to measure those things because if somebody goes to the doctor and they realize they now have high blood pressure or whatever it might be, that's not something we're really talking about. You'll see it in increase in insurance rates and coverage and everything, but
Yeah.
we're not measuring all those things. And there's a direct cost from bringing psychologists in, and congratulations that you to yourself and pat on your back that you do that, because a lot of companies don't. They tend to want to get past these events versus investing in how do we successfully recover from it. I'm more admired by organizations that when they've had a fatality or a terrible event, they honor it regularly. One organization, they refer to it internally as defining moments in their safety journey, and they honor it. They honor the people that have lost their life. It's not something that we don't want to talk about it anymore because it doesn't reflect who you are, but it reflects your journey and it reflects why it's so important to the organization. But we don't measure these things. We
No.
don't talk about it enough, and it's suppressed because of the vanity rate, which is the incident rate. It's more to make people look good than it is a true reflection about what's going on. Just like the Texas City and the Maconda incident, both of those moments before in the movie, you could see Deepwater Horizon, and at Texas City 2005, days before, both received awards for their safety performance, yet terrible things happen shortly afterwards. So we have a false sense of confidence with success and how we measure things, and we're not measuring the things that are hard to measure because they're hard to measure.
Well, it's
But an
interesting
imprecise measurement of the right can be better.
you talk about the stresses. Mental health was not something that was really discussed, among everybody. You're supposed to be strong. And it's interesting that the construction industry is taking that seriously because of the amount of suicides that have been happening to construction workers. And now it seems to be more okay to talk about the mental stresses. And that was not something that was even done 5 years ago. So it's interesting to see that. And then they started comparing how construction workers are similar to somebody in the military. They're working long hours, they're away from their families, they're on assignment somewhere, they're not home at night, the type. So it's the same kind of stressors of not having the family. So again, it's an indirect collateral that we're not thinking about, but at least we're starting to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm prior military. I was brought up a Texan. My father was prior military grandfather. So there's the kind of put a little dirt on it, you're fine. Boys don't cry. You don't talk about your feelings. So you tend to find more of that machismo in the construction industry. I mean, I did construction, so all of those things kind of affect who you are, but it's becoming socially more acceptable to talk about these things. And I think with COVID, while there was a lot of terrible things that collateral damage, speaking of, that affected organizations with COVID, I think it made it okay to start talking about this because there was more. I'm not going to mention the names of the organizations because I don't want to indirectly advertised, but I hear it on talk radio. There's so many different platforms now that make it easy to do a virtual counseling session. And I think that's fantastic. There's another thing that nobody has really been talking about. So I wrote an article a year or two about there's a term called a moral injury. And I find it terribly fascinating and something that we need to leverage and talk about more. It comes from a Dr. Jonathan Shea, who was the head of the VA and post Vietnam. And he started identifying these types of trauma that soldiers and Marines and everyone was experiencing. And I started seeing more of it in the healthcare system and after COVID. And a moral injury is an example of that would be in Vietnam, you were ordered by senior officer to take out a village, and you knew by doing so it was going to unfortunately kill a lot of women and children, but you still had to follow that command. And just doing something that's completely immoral against your values, the impact, the invisible wound that that has on you. We saw that during COVID when doctors had to turn away critical patients because they were so focused on the things they needed to do to recover from COVID. But I've seen that. I saw this a lot during COVID. I saw this a lot when just within country, the political climate around what was happening with people wanting to speak up more and protecting someone's sense of identity. That 2020 to 2023, I saw a lot of issues to where a lot of leaders felt uncomfortable talking to somebody about behavioral issues for fear of triggering them, and that would get legal involved. People lost their jobs because they felt as though that they disrespected somebody. So I saw moral injuries in that manifest in leaders that used to feel comfortable stopping an employee for doing an at-risk behavior would now walk by because they're so concerned about what might happen if they speak to somebody in a way that makes them feel triggered and the backlash that would come from that. And I heard several leaders saying things like, it keeps me up at night because it's no longer acceptable to talk to people about risky choices here. And I feel like something's going to happen to somebody. And when a terrible thing would happen, imagine the gravity that is now within somebody that they didn't speak up, and that's going to haunt them for the rest of their life. So there's all these things that we're not really talking about that I think we need to be talking about, because I think it's the new below the ocean line that we've talked about for years as an analogy for the
Right.
direct costs and indirect
Direct and
costs.
indirect, right. Well, I interviewed a couple of younger safety professionals. They're pretty high up in their business. And they said for the younger people, it's about relationships. I mean, it sounds like simplistic, but it's more about being comfortable with each other, just like the opposite of what you just said. The supervisor may feel they can't, but they feel that it's important that with the younger folks, you need to talk with them. You need to have a how's the family? Did you see the game last night? It needs to be more of that. So there's a comfort level in being able to address something that you know is wrong. Because if we walk past it, where's the moral issue there?
You're
So it's
absolutely right.
unfortunate.
And in my latest book, Shared Ownership, I wrote a chapter specifically on this. And to your point on supervisor, the most important people to shape performance and culture are often the most undertrained, under-resourced, and underutilized. And it's that frontline leader. So that's why in this book, I wanted to give them a bunch of tools. And one of the major elements of this book was what I call the 6 important relationships at work. And those relationships are the relationship an employee has to the purpose of the organization, to the performance of their work, the purpose of the objective, why we're pursuing safety excellence. But then it's also, depending on your level, the people above you, the relationship with your peers, and the relationship to the people below you on the organizational chart. So if you're in that leadership position, but relationships are absolutely the most important aspect to that. So you're right, and I'm proud to hear that the younger professionals recognize this. And all the time, I'll ask in leadership workshops that I'll do a thought exercise, and I'll say, what's the most important thing to most people? And usually a lot of people will get that right quickly, and it's family. The family is the most important thing to most people. And then I'll ask them just a thought exercise. If you have three people that work for you, picture their names, think of their faces. If you don't, think about three people you'd like to be a positive influence on, picture name faces. And then I'll say, now it's a thought exercise, so don't respond in any way, but can you name their family members? And if you can, very likely you've given them the impression you care enough about them to know who's important. And if you can't, unintentionally, I'm sure, maybe you've given that message or that intention that you don't really care. So getting to know people, getting to know their preferred name, getting to know what their interests are, the people that are important to them, their interests outside of work, that's when you're connecting at a different level. And that's when, if you know the family members, you can say, my wife's name is Misty, so I'll put it on me. Shawn, I really want to I really want to encourage you to approach this a little bit differently, because I would be the one that has to call Misty, and I don't want to make that call. And the more that you can connect with people and connect with their values, the stronger the relationship. And the supervisor's score is the team score. So they're judged by the performance of their team. So that team will go above and beyond for somebody that they know really cares about who they are, has an interest in their success, and genuinely likes or at least respects each other. So relationships are the most important thing.
And then I've done some violence in the workplace type programs as well. And people they're loath to speak up. It's very important if you know somebody and you start to realize they're not acting like they usually do, or they say something that's kind of inflammatory. And it may be somebody you've known for 20 years. And that's such a trigger. But again, the taboo about bringing something to somebody's attention, do we want to be the one telling on them, what have you? But I had incidents where one peer knew somebody else was not safe, but they wouldn't tell on them because they didn't want their a buddy. They don't want to get them in trouble. And I go, and of course something happens, and I go, why didn't you tell me? They said, well, we didn't, it's just still you don't recognize it for what it is. And unfortunately, I'm old enough to remember when it wasn't like that. And now we have to be more on top of those type of things. And it's unfortunate that we're at this point in
And just like
civilization.
And just like bringing in psychologists after the fact, you could bring in, there's a lot of tools available on how to have those conversations with people, because it comes to competence and confidence. They don't know how to have that conversation, don't feel comfortable. Now, I was working with a power generation and distribution company, and one of the superintendents told me a story that 20 something years ago, he was a journeyman on a line crew, overhead power lines. And he said that he was going through a pretty terrible divorce at the time. And his boss, the supervisor, knew what was going on and made the decision to pull him out of the bucket for 3 weeks. And when he was telling me the story back then, he was quite upset. He used some different terms, but he was quite upset. But he said, as I've matured, I realize he saved my life, because I should not have been doing that work when my head was not in the game. And I'll tell on myself another story. I had a great boss when I was at Fleur Daniel. After the military, in university, my career started in England, an engineering firm, and then Fleur Daniel, a big EPC company, recruited me. And every day I would come into the office, my boss Simon would say, "Another day, another headache." He was a Englishman. I always say, "Another day, another headache," and we all thought it was kind of funny. That was his disposition. But in COVID, one of the first individuals I lost was Simon. And, this is years after I worked for him, but we lost him because he took his life. And as I reflect on that, almost 30 years ago when I worked for him, was he struggling with something back then? Was something going on that just made his disposition as he came into work terrible? And I wasn't my brother's keeper. I didn't say anything back then. And I didn't know to, but also didn't have the skills to have those conversations. And I didn't feel comfortable saying something to my boss. But maybe had somebody intervened along the way, maybe it could have been something that stopped that from happening so many years later. And I don't think we give those skills. I don't think we invest enough in that, because it's hard
And
to
we don't practice
quantify
it.
the ROI, and we don't practice it. You're right.
It's that old machismo thing again, often. So, what does a true culture of care and support look like day to day?
I think day to day, it looks like the relationships that people have. It looks like the interactions. I had a plant manager that told me that one of the ways that he measures the success of what he's doing to invest in the employee experience at work is what he called it. He says periodically, and I don't tell anybody I'm doing this because I don't want to work people towards measurements. But he said periodically I'll hang out where people are coming in to clock in, and I'm counting how many smiles come in the door. Do people look like they're happy to come to work? And when he sees more smiles, he feels as though he's getting better at what he's doing. So I think what a culture of care looks like is you can observe behaviors, and behaviors are observable. So they're, even if it's imprecise, measurable, but you can observe that people genuinely want to be there. They care about the work that they're doing. Uh, Regardless of the work, you can tell the interactions, the peer to peer, the conversations that are occurring, the call outs, the positive reinforcement, the politely expressing of concern when there's risk. I think the absence of that is you have, let's say, a plant of 100 people, you have 100 lone rangers that are in there that aren't talking to one another. They're in their own silos within the organization. But I also see it in cross-functional work that if you're in an operating environment, when maintenance comes in, the operators know everybody, everybody knows their names. There's a bit of jovial, there's candor, but there's also, like what you've mentioned, it's psychologically and socially okay to have conversations with people. And you can clearly see it in a category of people are watching out for each other. But I think we need specificity, and specificity matters for leaders to be able to observe, is what I'm doing to create a culture of care. Scott Geller coined the phrase many years ago, actively caring, but you see people actively demonstrating that they care for one another. And that's both on the positive side of things. Hey, Sheila, you did that. That was fantastic. Way to go. That was fantastic. And Sheila, I'm concerned about how you're approaching that task. Can we step back and can you talk me through what you're thinking here? You see that respect, but you see the respect because people care about one another.
But I think you said it earlier, often the first line supervisor is so slammed for him or her to take the time to be able to actually do those things, interact. And for a company to support it, that to me would be a good safety culture, that you're supported in being able to observe behavior, as you say, or check up on people. You really need that to happen. So I know we've kind of said it in many different ways, but why is this topic important now? What makes this important?
I think it's becoming more newsworthy now. I think we're talking about it more now. And unfortunately, as you've alluded to, we tend to talk about more of these things because of tragic events that have happened. But I think we're diving a little bit more into Amy Edmondson's coined the term psychological safety, the Jonathan Shea's moral injuries. I think we're starting to understand things about the human interaction at work that we didn't understand. And I think we have more frameworks, we have more tools, methodologies are being developed that allow us to apply this. So I think it's like anything else that if everybody else is talking about it, then leaders want to know, well, what are the other folks doing? I hope it doesn't become another fad and another program of the month that I fear that if not, if not, if not approached correctly, I think it will be. But I think it's becoming more important. It's always been an issue, but I think now we have some language to talk about it.
Now we're able to do it. So that's a good thing. So, any final thoughts for us? I know we've talked about a lot of things here, but any final thought you'd like to leave with us?
Yeah, a lot of data shows that you are significantly more likely to get injured outside of work than at work. And I have a theory that if you give people tools to talk about safety concerns with the people that they love and care about the most, it makes it easier to exercise that muscle and bring it in at work. But we tend to talk about those tools and apply it at work first, which is socially awkward. So I think organizations, if you can make the topic that we're talking about here today an off the job topic first versus an on the job topic, because they already are intrinsically motivated to want their family members, their kids, their parents to be successful and longevity of life and everything. So I'm arguing that give people these tools and challenge them to start exercising this with the people they already love and care or live with. Hopefully they love the people that they're living with. But if they start to apply it there, I think it'll be easier then and more socially acceptable to use that at work. But I think you also have to create scenarios where people can practice this. And I don't mean role playing, but at least have some case studies and bring a small group of people together in kind of a what would you do? Imagine you found yourself in this situation. Here are some ways you could talk about it. What would you do here? And start socializing the concepts and start making other people become aware that, hey, I'm not the only one that has this concern. And hey, that was a really good way to approach it. And let's run some scenarios to where I can practice doing that. Because I think it was Lombardi. Yeah, it was Coach Lombardi that says practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. So we have to give people the opportunity to practice and get good at this if we want them to be able to step up when it really matters.
Like you say, when I've been told more than once, it used to be fun until you came around and started spouting your rules. I take that as a win. I'm sorry. So, okay, our mission with the Michigan Safety Conference is to enhance workplace health and safety by sharing EHS best practices, provide education, and create a community of experts to help eliminate workplace injuries and fatalities. As Shawn has pointed out, there are costs above and beyond the initial incident. Besides the personal toll to employee and family, the reputation and morale of a company can also be impacted and its culture shaken if we don't take these costs into account. And I appreciate your sharing those stories with us, Shawn. I'd like to again thank Shawn Galloway of ProAct Safety, who can be reached at sgalloway@proactsafety.com. If you have any questions about this podcast, would like to register for the 2026 conference, or if you'd like to be a guest or sponsor one of our podcasts, information can be found on our website at michsafetyconference.org. Thank you for listening to Safety Spectrum. This is Sheila Ide.